All right, in this episode, we're going to zoom in on non-response error because it's really a particular type of error that occurs very, very often in survey research. It's actually the marketing research industry's biggest problem today. This has actually a couple of reasons. So first of all, the amount of research has increased dramatically over the past decades. So a lot of companies are chasing the same target market. So these consumers get really fed up with completing all these surveys, and they're also increasingly skeptical of the importance and the benefit of participating in research. And then on top of that, an additional reason is that some respondents might perceive it as an invasion of their privacy, because sometimes research is used as a disguise for telemarketing, which obviously irritates people. So non-response as a result has become very common. There's different types of non-response error. First of all, refusals, which means that participants don't even start participating in the survey or the interview. Secondly, break-offs, which means that during the survey or the interview, respondents stop participating altogether, so they just quit. Or item omission, which means that respondents refuse to answer certain specific questions. So usually you determine the response rate of a survey by looking at the percentage of the total sample that completed the survey of an interview. But of course, what do you consider a completed interview? And this is, of course, a judgment call. It varies from project to project. So usually when all your primary research questions, so your most important core questions in your survey or your interview are answered, you can consider that a pretty much successful interview and at least keep that data. Now, some data purists would argue that it might be better to just ditch all the data that has some item omission, but this very rigid approach will actually cause you to lose a lot of data, which makes it harder to get a large enough sample size in the end. So a couple of things you can do when it comes to dealing with non-response error is a couple things before as well as after you do your data collection. Before the data collection starts, so what you could do is send some advance notification in the case of mail surveys. So sending a letter or a quick notification saying, hey, this survey is going to come your way. Would you be interested in participating? And then people who self-select already at that point are usually more committed to actually also complete the survey. Providing incentives, and usually monetary incentives tend to work the best, are another way to boost response before you actually do your data collection. And then follow-up mailing, and that is when you send out your survey, providing a couple additional follow-up mailings where you encourage people to still participate in a survey they got last week or the week before, a couple days ago, and so on. So basically sending them reminders to still complete the survey if they haven't already done so. And then telephone interviews, usually the best strategy there is to do callback attempts, which means pretty much the same thing as those follow-up mailings, where if a person is not home, you can call them again and again until they pick up. This would be a good way to especially reach those people that are necessary to be included based on your sample plan, but that you otherwise won't have in your sample. Then after the fact, so after your data is collected, and if you notice that in your database there's a lot of missing data that you're dealing with, a couple of things you could do is first of all oversampling. And oversampling means that you just gather more data. Let's say in your sample, you notice that most of the females in your sample, let's say if you do quota sampling, did complete the survey, but the males disproportionately didn't. So what you could do is send out your survey to more males to kind of complete your quota, to reach your quota when it comes to male-female percentages of your sample. Another approach you could take is weighing your data. So that means that, again, based on quota sampling, you could let underrepresented groups count, let's say, twice as heavy, or just have a certain factor applied to their answers so that they count more than your overrepresented groups. I don't think this is the cleanest way of working with missing data, but it's definitely something that is sometimes done. So weighing these averages based on how represented certain proportions of the populations are in your sample. So these are the most common ways to deal with non-response error. But again, be aware that non-response is something that is going to occur regardless, at least to some extent, but you can minimize the amount of non-response error you get.